Welcome, connoisseurs of fine common cardboard, to today's live stream and to this edition of Pauper Commander Primers focused on Sailor's Bane. We'll be with you shortly. Thanks for coming. And here we go. Hello and welcome, connoisseurs of fine common cardboard, to today's live stream. My name is Ryan, Pauper, and I'm so glad to have you all here with me today to talk about a favorite deck of mine, one that's close to my heart, Sailor's Bane. So without any further ado, we're going to launch right into a little bit of a primer on how to play this deck, what this commander is, ways that you can build it that are dynamic to different kinds of metas, and why you should play this incredibly broken blue dragon turtle. So here we are. Sailor's Bane is a 9-mana card. It is very expensive. This card is, in many ways, super similar to a Murktide Regent. It's about the same size. It's about the same mana. Instead of paying for Delve, however, we are paying for this cost by putting instants and sorceries and cards with adventure into our graveyard or into exile. It is also a 7/7, and what Murktide Regent doesn't have is Ward 4. And as a friend of mine recently said, Ward 4 is almost functionally untargetable. A person who wants to target this with something like a cast down is spending 6 mana to do so. Even a snuff out takes 4 mana and 4 life to do it, which we can promptly respond by dazing it, because this deck is packed with some of the most broken blue spells ever printed. So when we're looking at Sailor's Bane and we evaluate how we want to build this commander, I think the first sort of deck building heuristic that we might use for this is to be using what's called a Turbo-XEROX strategy. And Turbo-XEROX comes from this concept that you would just print off cards. It was a concept invented in California during the early days of Magic during the 90s. And it was the idea of playing a lot of different cards that all had draw a card on them. And that by doing so, you basically filled your deck with things that were just going to find you other things. And it made your deck functionally smaller to do so. So free spells that draw cards, cheap spells that draw cards, cheap card selection enables your deck to be really hyper-focused around a small range of things that you want to be doing, and you want to guarantee that you're going to get there. So Turbo-XEROX decks are able to accomplish this by playing less lands and then replacing those lands at about a 2-to-1 ratio with cantrips. So that was where I started with this deck, and it's how we arrived at this particular build of the deck. The learning journey here started with Turbo-XEROX, and that's because everything that we put into the graveyard is essentially a ritual or a mana generating tool for Sailor's Bane. When we cast, for example, something like a Careful Note, we are putting Careful Note, which is an instant, into the graveyard. And if we mill an instant or a sorcery or a card with adventure into the graveyard, then we're actually getting essentially 3 mana towards casting Sailor's Bane. And as you can see, this is a pretty commander-centric strategy. The whole plan is to put cards into the graveyard so that Sailor's Bane is 2 mana. Now, the beauty of this over something like Murktide Regent is that we don't need to exile those cards to cast them. It's just passively reduced. So there's some ways that this is really similar to Crackling Drake, where Crackling Drake gets bigger and bigger and bigger over the course of the game passively by just doing what you normally want to do, which is cast spells and interact with the table. So Sailor's Bane's cost is reduced. So instead of being really eager to fill the graveyard so that the Crackling Drake is really big, we're eager to fill the graveyard so that we can deploy the Sailor's Bane, and then for the rest of the game, we're only going to pay 2 blue mana. Rarely do you pay more than 2. The only other time that you do is when you have an Opal Palace in play, and then that allows you to get up to that very attractive 8 power. For those of you who are less familiar with Pauper Commander, the commander damage is 16, which means that Sailor's Bane only needs to gain 1 power for it to be a 2-shot kill, or it needs to gain 2 power on one of those hits to become a 2-shot kill. So the Turbo-XEROX concept is all about putting all that stuff into the graveyard so that it's very cheap. The goal initially when I built this was we want to play Sailor's Bane on turn 3 every single game. We're slipping underneath the interaction. There might have to be a counterspell to stop us. It's not likely they're going to even be able to target us. It's possible they could edict us, but even then on turn 4, it's a good chance we just go cantrip or we put something in the graveyard and we cast it again for just 2 mana. So low land counts are part of the equation here. High spell instant and sorcery count in the deck. And you'll see down there on the screen that there are 17 sorceries and there are 37 instants with only 28 lands. Okay, so that's kind of one of the first design heuristics is you want to be casting a lot of spells and you want to be doing them very cheaply so you can cast lots of spells in one turn and fill the graveyard with a lot of stuff. The next thing is that we need to ensure that Sailor's Bane can connect. So we have to have ways to give Sailor's Bane evasion so that it can hit people and make use of the sort of implied tempo of playing a turn 3 7/7 that can't be targeted. So that's going to require that we give it flying, unblockable, things of that nature. The next one, which I alluded to earlier, is that we do need to pump its power a little bit to create that lethal interaction where we kill our opponent in 2 shots. So the next thing is ways to pump the Sailor's Bane. And with all these spells, we're going to want them to be very cheap and efficient so that we can hold up interaction for what our opponents are doing. So with that in mind, oftentimes we're going to try and have that pump and that evasion line up together so that they're doing it at the same time. One little package to accomplish what we're looking to do. So with that all said, let us look at the list. So this is not the list that is on the cPDH deck database. This is actually the newest and most effective iteration of Sailor's Bane that I've used for an open meta. And what that means is that if we're expecting there to be a lot of essentially different decks that we're playing against, then we want to play something that is prepared to handle a variety of different threats and challenges. And so this list is somewhat different from the original build of Sailor's Bane that I had. The original build of Sailor's Bane was very geared towards playing out that turn 3 Sailor's Bane and then tempoing your opponents out of the game. 1-2 shot, 1-2 shot, 1-2 shot, using our counterspells very sparingly to stop combo players. And it was designed when combo was a much more dominant force in the meta. Now we have lots of different decks. We have aggro decks and mid-range decks, combo and control. And so in that environment, we have to have one thing, and that is blockers. Blockers, in a similar sense to removal, do the function of stopping us from dying. And that's because they can get in the way of things. They're going to disincentivize attackers. And in some cases, they can help us apply pressure, which is really important. So with all that in mind, the main difference in this list, adapted for an open meta, is simply that it has creatures that enter the battlefield, they get us a card or they put cards in the graveyard, or it's an instant or a sorcery that makes a body. And then those bodies help create the space for us to then to then go to work with our Sailor's Bane, give it unblockability or evasion, and then kill people while we are being defended by those blockers. So that's an important concept here. And we're going to go back to that original build and we'll take a look at that. But this is the one that I'm recommending for people right now. This is a starting place for that. Over time, as we get more creatures that enter the battlefield and give us some form of value while blocking for us, those will probably come in too. And yeah, so when we look at this right here, you're going to notice the first thing is we have 28 draw spells. And these spells are all intended to accomplish one thing, and that is to replace themselves, to dig deep. So there's more than one thing. Replace themselves, dig deep, and fill the graveyard. So we've got classics like Brainstorm, Consider, Careful Study, Mental Note, Opt, Otherworldly Gaze, one of the all-stars of the deck, Ponder. We have even Portent, which is another 1-mana cantrip that draws us a card. So basically Ponder that's slow. And then we have Preordain, Serum Vision, Sleight of Hand. We have the classics like Thought Scour and Mental Note to fill the graveyard. And all of this means that we are incredibly likely, like 95+% chance to have a Sailor's Bane on turn 3 or 4. Okay. In this particular build, we still have a lot of the ways that we can do that very quickly, like a turn 1 Mental Note into a turn 2 Foresight, a card that you might see only in Legacy or in Commander, which says search for 3 cards, you exile them, and then you draw a card at the beginning of your next upkeep. In this deck early on, this functions as you put it as a ritual. You put 4 instants and sorceries in the graveyard, and then you draw a card off of it. In the late game, you exile lands because you don't want to draw them. So it's functional at any point in the game. But a turn 1, maybe like a Gitaxian Probe, followed by Mental Note, turn 2 Foresight, turn 3 Sailor's Bane. Is kind of the vision that we have for turn 3, but turn 4 is fine too. And these creatures also help us mill. We have cards like Iceberg Cancerix that can put cards selectively into the graveyard. Once we have Iceberg Cancerix out, we're never ever going to have trouble casting Sailor's Bane because we can just play a land, get that mill, make sure that we're at that number. But functionally, Sailor's Bane doesn't die that much because it's so durable. So with that game plan in mind, the thing that I want to talk about is how Sailor's Bane plays as opposed to how people think it plays. Sailor's Bane is a predator for combo, but because of that, it's oftentimes the last person we are going to eliminate from a game. What Sailor's Bane is most likely to suffer from is dying to an aggro or a mid-range deck randomly chipping in and getting damage. And that's because we have only one way in the entire deck to gain life. That way that we gain life is with command performance, and it only happens in 1 of 3 games. In 1 of 3 games, we will flip the card, the sticker here, that grants us lifelink. And if we get that, it completely changes how we play the game, because then all we need to do is swing, and we don't even actually need to worry so much about evasion because we're gaining so much life off the Sailor's Bane. And the way that stickers work is that they permanently modify that creature so that it's always going to have lifelink. So it will die, we'll recast it, it still has lifelink. So that's why we need to be more focused on eliminating the people who are most likely to eliminate us, because we don't have a board presence that dissuades them from attacking us. The other thing we need to watch out for is the first person that we kill, we want to do it by hitting them twice. Eliminate 1 player from the game first. The second thing is that when it's down to the other 2, we really want to make sure that we do the same thing to one of those people. If we get them both into one-shot range, then they can both justify ganging up on us and then killing us. So it's about working the table, communicating clearly about who you're swinging at so that people justify not interacting with you in the moments where it might be possible. Because it's often the case that they won't be able to interact with the Sailor's Bane, but they can interact with the spells that we cast to modify the Sailor's Bane. Something like these evasion spells, where they can stop that and then they can chump block the Sailor's Bane. You're going to see that there is a deep package of counterspells, anything from Intervene to Spell Pierce, really efficient things like that. And then we also have cards like Foil. Some of the noteworthy inclusions here, some of the really powerful 2-mana counterspells we also get are Spell Rupture. We get Dispersal Shield. Both of these are functional counterspells. They do the same exact thing. Arcane Denial is great. So a deep bench of counterspells. We also have some removal, one of which is tutorable with Aether Spellbomb, which can just sit out on the field, which is quite nice. And then we also have some bounce spells. And all of these are going to be modal in some way, shape, or form to generate some amount of value or accomplish a very specific purpose. Echoing Truth can be used on Gut tokens, the skeleton tokens, which is really, really, really important because Gut is a deck that is kind of scary to us. It's one that I would think about when it comes to the game. You want to really think carefully. If they're attacking you, if they choose to attack you, you're going to need to eliminate them very quickly because those 4/1s are going to get around your blockers. They're really big, and that's one of the reasons why Echoing Truth is really important in the deck. It also can deal with something like a Pestilence, which can be a problem if they get to keep the Pestilence in play while we have Sailor's Bane, which can't be killed. Force Away is another one. This is going to loot while returning a creature to its hand. Runaway Together is going to hit 2 creatures at once. Winds of Rebuke is going to mill cards into our graveyard. So one of the play patterns is a little bit strange, is at turn 2, if we don't have another way to spend our mana or to cantrip, we can Winds of Rebuke somebody's mana rock on turn 2 at the end step to get cards into the graveyard to cast an early Sailor's Bane. You Come to River grants unblockability as well as a modal way to bounce a non-land permanent. And then we have Boomerang for targeting lands that are loaded up with auras. Gretchen Titchwillow is a very powerful combo deck in the format, and Boomerang is a really important way to hedge our bets around that. We can tutor for it with Muddle the Mixture as well. Okay, in terms of the creatures, we have Hard Evidence, we have Merfolk Secret Keeper, both of which are going to act as a way to ramp our Sailor's Bane by putting cards in the graveyard while also making a nice blocking body for very cheap. We have the iconic Tolarian Terror now, which is kind of a backup threat, but it's also just an amazing blocker. Ward 2, 5/5. This is just Gurmag Angler. If we can play this out, I mean, there are some turn sequences we can do in the turbo version of this where we deploy Sailor's Bane and Tolarian Terror on the same turn on turn 3, which is crazy. It's so much pressure. Augur of Bolas is an iconic one. Philology Archaeologist is the upgrade to Augur of Bolas in this deck because it is going to, in fact, put cards in the graveyard. So sometimes we cast Philology Archaeologist, we put all of the cards into the graveyard, and then we give it a +1/+1 counter, and it becomes a 1/4. Sometimes we'll do that. Jeering Homunculus will take the pressure off by goading somebody to attack somebody else while being a 0/4. Modern Age is going to loot us twice while creating an evasive blocker, mostly a blocker. Academy Wall is going to come down, and it's going to loot every time we cast spells, which is so powerful in the late game because we can use this to take the lands that we don't need and pitch them into the graveyard. The last one I wanted to mention here, the last two, is a Trinket Mage, which is going to allow us to search up for Bone Splitter. It allows us to search up for Seat of the Synod if we're really in a pinch for a land, or it allows us to get the last one. Oh, no, that's it. So yeah, just Bone Splitter, Aether Spellbomb, that's it, which can be removal to stop a player that's aggressing on us or stop a combo player by just being onboard protection. The last thing I wanted to mention is Sailor's Bane in the creature category. This is our backup Sailor's Bane, and I've had games where this is a 21 power creature. You put it into play, you protect it maybe once, maybe twice, you give it unblockability, and you kill somebody while attacking somebody else with your Sailor's Bane. This is an amazing card. It plays really well in the deck. And then the last categories we're going to talk about are our Evasion and our Pump, which kind of go hand in hand. You'll see that there's a lot of crossover between these, but basically we need ways for the Sailor's Bane to be able to get through. And this is one of the key differences between this and the turbo varieties that are meant for more combo-centric metas, is that the importance of unblockability goes up a lot when we're in an open meta and there's a lot of creatures in play. We need to pay a little bit more for the effects that do this so that we can get both the power and the unblockability, which is where cards like Tricks of the Trade come in, which is going to give us that power and the unblockability, and it's going to stick around. We have other ones. We have is Stealth Mission, which is going to leave counters on it while also granting it unblockability for 1 turn, which is oftentimes enough. So if you hit somebody, hit them for 7, Stealth Mission on the next one, hit them again, that is lethal. We have You Come to a River, which can give us that +1 pump while making it unblockable. We have Spectral Fright, +2/+2 in flying. You'll notice that it's about a third of it is flying, and then the other parts of it are unblockable. And that's because flying is increasingly not a reliable form of evasion if you need to make sure that you're hitting every turn. Because every combat is incredibly important with this particular deck. We need to optimize every single combat to deliver as much damage as we possibly can. So that's why we're focusing on stuff like Distortion Strike. We've got cards like Shadow Rift, Slip Through Space. These are also cantrips we can cast early on our opponent's stuff or on our stuff to draw cards. And then other forms of evasion here. So with all that in mind, this is Sailor's Bane. This is a great deck if you're looking for a way to entice your Legacy and Modern friends to come and play Pauper Commander, because this is functionally very, very similar to Izzet Delver decks in Legacy and to the ubiquitous Murktide region decks in Modern. It is really a pure tempo deck. I call it mid-range here only because those creatures bias that crucial time so that we don't have to kill as fast. We're not in such a rush to kill people. And it's kind of an adaptation based on my lived experience with the deck. But this is a great deck to recommend to those people because they'll get to play with Murktide Regent as if it's always in their hand. And that is so powerful. So this has been Sailor's Bane. I hope you all enjoyed this production. I appreciate you all showing up today, and I'll look forward to catching you in some of our live games. Connoisseur is a fine common cardboard. Thank you. Have a wonderful day, and goodbye.